We don't want to extend beyond 2014. That's the point we're making. You know, if it was just this, I feel like we would be able to call this a success, but it's not. What we are witnessing as we turn on our television screens these days is the absolute unraveling of the Obama foreign policy. Problems are growing at home, but problems are growing abroad, but jobs aren't growing here at home.
Let me go back to this. He says we're absolutely leaving in 2014. You're saying that's not an absolute, but you won't talk about what conditions would justify.
Do you know why we say that?
I'd like to know
because we
why.
don't want to broadcast to our enemies, put a date on your calendar, wait us out, and then come back.
But you agree with the timeline.
We do agree. We do agree with the timeline and the transition. But what any administration will do in 2013 is assess the situation to see how best to complete this timeline. What we do not want to do
in 2014.
What we do not want to do is give our allies reason to trust us less, and our enemies more. We don't want to embolden our enemies to hold and wait out for us and then take over the country.
Martha, that's a bizarre statement.
That's why we want to make sure. No, that's
a bizarre statement since 49 of our allies, hear me, 49 of our allies signed on to this position.
And we're reading that they want to
49 of our allies said out in 2014. It's the responsibility of the Afghans. We have other responsibilities.
Do you think this timeline, but we have soldiers and Marines, we have Afghan forces murdering our forces over there. The Taliban is, do you think, taking advantage of this timeline?
Oh, look, the Taliban, what we found out, and you saw it in Iraq, Martha, unless you set a timeline, Baghdad, in the case of Iraq, and Kabul, in the case of Afghanistan, will not step up. They're happy to let us continue to do the job. International security forces do the job. The only way they step up is say, fellas, we're leaving. We've trained you. Step up. Step up.
Let me go back.
That's the only way it works.
Let me go back to the surge troops that we put in there. And you brought this up, Congressman Ryan. I have talked to a lot of troops. I've talked to senior officers who were concerned that the surge troops were pulled out during the fighting season, and some of them saw that as a political move. So can you tell me, Vice President Biden, what was the military reason for bringing those surge troops home before the fighting season ended? The military reason for bringing those, by the way, when the president announced the surge, you'll remember, Martha, he said the surge will be out by the end of the summer. The military said the surge will be out. Nothing political about this. Before the surge occurred, so you be a little straight with me here, too. Before the surge occurred, we said they'll be out by the end of the summer. That's what the military said. The reason for that is... The military follows orders. Trust me, there are people who are concerned about pulling out.
There are people that are concerned, but not the Joint Chiefs. That was their recommendation in the Oval Office to the President of the United States of America. I sat there. I'm sure you'll find someone who disagrees with the Pentagon. I'm positive you'll find that within the military. But that's not the case here. And secondly, the reason why the military said that is you cannot wait and have a cliff. It takes, months and months and months to draw down forces.
Let me try and illustrate the issue here, because I think this can get a little confusing. We've all met with General Allen and General Scaparrotti in Afghanistan to talk about fighting seasons. Here's the way it works. The mountain passes fill in with snow. The Taliban and the terrorists and the Haqqani and the Quetta Shura come over from Pakistan to fight our men and women. When it fills in with snow, they can't do it. That's what we call fighting seasons. In the warm months, fighting gets really high. In the winter, it goes down. And so when Admiral Mullen and General Petraeus came to Congress and said, if you pull these people out before the fighting season is end, it puts people more at risk. That's the problem. Yes, we drew 22,000 troops down last month, but the remaining troops that are there, who still have the same mission to prosecute counterinsurgency, are doing it with fewer people. That makes them less safe. We're sending fewer people out in all these hotspots to do the same job that they were supposed to do a month ago.
Because we
took 22,000 people out for them to do it.
Over to the Afghan troops we trained. No one got pulled out that didn't get filled in by trained Afghan personnel. And he's conflating two issues. The fighting season that Petraeus was talking about and Admiral Mullen was the fighting season this spring. That's what he was talking about. We did not pull them out.
The calendar works the same every year.
It does work the same every year.
And spring, summer, fall. It's warm or it's not. They're still fighting us. They're still coming over the passes. They're still coming in to Zabul, to Kunar, to all of these areas, but we are sending fewer people to the front to fight them, and that's
right, because that's the Afghan responsibility. We've trained them.
Not in the East.
Let's move to another war.
Not in the East.
RC East,
the most dangerous place in the world.
That's why we don't want to send fewer people to do the job.
That's why we should send Americans in to do the job instead of the... You'd rather Americans be going in and doing the job instead of the
we are already sending Americans to do the job, but fewer of them. That's
right. We're sending in more Afghans to do the job. Afghans to do the job.
Let's move to another war, the civil war in Syria, where there are estimates that more than 25,000, 30,000 people have now been killed. In March of last year, President Obama explained the military action taken in Libya by saying it was in the national interest to go in and prevent further massacres from occurring there. So why doesn't the same logic apply in Syria?
It's a different country. It's a different country. It is 5 times as large geographically. It has 1/5 the population, that is Libya, 1/5 the population, 5 times as large geographically. It's in a part of the world where you're not going to see whatever would come from that war. It seep into a regional war. You are in a country that is heavily populated in the midst of the most dangerous area in the world. And in fact, if in fact it blows up and the wrong people gain control, it's going to have impact on the entire region, causing potentially regional wars. We are working hand and glove with the Turks, with the Jordanians, with the Saudis, and with all the people in the region, attempting to identify the people who deserve the help so that when Assad goes, and he will go, there will be a legitimate government that follows on, not an al-Qaeda-sponsored government that follows on. And all this loose talk of my friend Governor Romney and the congressman about how we could do so much more in there. What more would they do other than put American boots in the ground? The last thing America needs is to get in another ground war in the Middle East, requiring tens of thousands, if not well over 100,000 American forces. They are the facts. They are the facts. Now, every time the governor is asked about this, he doesn't say anything. He goes up with a whole lot of verbiage, but when he gets pressed, he says, no, he would not do anything different than we are doing now. Are they proposing putting American troops in the ground? Putting American aircraft in the airspace? Is that what they're proposing? If they do, they should speak up and say so. But that's not what they're saying. We are doing it exactly like we need to do to identify those forces who, in fact, will provide for a stable government and not cause a regional Sunni-Shia war when Bashir Assad falls.
Congressman Ryan.
Nobody is proposing to send troops to Syria, American troops. Now, let me say it this way. How would we do things differently? We wouldn't refer to Bashar Assad as a reformer when he's killing his own civilians with his Russian-provided weapons. We wouldn't be outsourcing our foreign policy to the United Nations, giving Vladimir Putin veto power over our efforts to try and deal with this issue. He's vetoed 3 of them. Hillary Clinton went to Russia to try and convince them not to do so. They thwarted her efforts. She said they were on the wrong side of history. She was right about that. This is just one more example of how the Russia reset's not working. And so where are we? After international pressure mounted, then President Obama said Bashar Assad should go. It's been over a year. The man has slaughtered tens of thousands of his own people, and more foreign fighters are spilling into this country. So the longer this has gone on, the more groups like al-Qaeda are going in. We could have more easily identified the Free Syrian Army, the Freedom Fighters, working with our allies, the Turks, the Qataris, the Saudis, had we had a better plan in place to begin with, working through our allies. But no, we waited for Kofi Annan to try and come up with an agreement through the UN. That bought Bashar Assad time. We gave Russia veto power over our efforts through the UN, and meanwhile, about 30,000 Syrians are dead.
What would my friend do differently? If you notice, he never answers the question.
No, we would not be going through the UN on all of these things.
You don't go through the UN. We are in the process now and have been for months in making sure that help, humanitarian aid, as well as other aid and training is getting to those forces that we believe, the Turks believe, the Jordanians believe, the Saudis believe are the free forces inside of Syria. That is underway. Our allies were all on the same page, NATO as well as our Arab allies, in terms of trying to get a settlement. That was their idea. We're the ones that said enough. With regard to the reset not working, the fact of the matter is that Russia has a different interest in Syria than we do, and that's not in our interest.
What happens if Assad does not fall? Congressman Ryan, what happens to the region? What happens if he hangs on? What happens if he does?
Then Iran keeps their greatest ally in the region. He's a sponsor of terrorism. He'll probably continue slaughtering his people. We and the world community will lose our credibility on this. Look, he mentioned the reset.
So what would Romney Ryan do about that credibility?
Well, we agree with the same red line, actually, they do on chemical weapons, but not putting American troops in other than to secure those chemical weapons. They're right about that. But what we should have done earlier is work with those freedom fighters, those dissidents in Syria. We should not have called Bashar Assad a reformer. And we should not have waited for Russia to give us the green light. We should not have waited for Russia to give us the green light at the UN to do something about it. They're still arming the man. Iran is flying flights over Iraq.
And the opposition is being armed.
To help Bashar Assad. And by the way, if we had the status of forces agreement that the vice president said he would bet his vice presidency on in Iraq, we probably would have been able to prevent that. But he failed to achieve that as well. Again,
let me ask you quickly, what's your criteria for intervention?
Yeah.
In Syria?
Worldwide.
What is in the national interest of the American people?
How about
what is in the national
interest?
Security of the American people? It's got to be in the strategic national interests of our country.
No humanitarian.
Each situation will come up with its own set of circumstances, but putting American troops on the ground, that's got to be within the national security interest of the American people.
I want to we're almost out of time here.
Embargoes and sanctions and overflights, those are things that don't put American troops on the ground. But if you're talking about putting American troops on the ground, only in our national security interests.
I want to move on, and I want to return home for these last few questions. This debate is indeed historic. We have two Catholic candidates, first time on a stage such as this. And I would like to ask you both to tell me what role your religion has played in your own personal views on abortion. Please talk about how you came to that decision. Talk about how your religion played a part in that. And please, this is such an emotional issue for so many people in this country. Please talk personally about this, if you could. Congressman Ryan.
I don't see how a person can separate their public life from their private life or from their faith. Our faith informs us in everything we do. My faith informs me about how to take care of the vulnerable, about how to make sure that people have a chance in life. Now, you want to ask basically why I'm pro-life? It's not simply because of my Catholic faith. That's a factor, of course. But it's also because of reason and science. You know, I think about 10.5 years ago, my wife Jana and I went to Mercy Hospital in Janesville, where I was born, for our 7-week ultrasound for our firstborn child. And we saw that heartbeat. Our little baby was in the shape of a bean. And to this day, we have nicknamed our firstborn child, Liza, Bean. Now, I believe that life begins at conception. Those are the reasons why I'm pro-life. Now, I understand this is a difficult issue, and I respect people who don't agree with me on this. But the policy of a Romney administration will be to oppose abortion